They gave me the worst room on the family trip and laughed, saying, "You'll get what you deserve." I smiled quietly until I revealed, "Actually, I own this hotel," and watched their faces fall as security escorted them out and they had nowhere left to go. I, 32M, stood in the cramped storage room they'd given me, staring at the mop bucket in the corner and the single cot pressed against the wall. The smell of cleaning supplies burned my nostrils. Through the thin walls, I could hear my brother's laughter echoing from what I knew was the presidential suite 3 floors above. This wasn't supposed to be how things went. The family reunion had been planned for months. My mother insisted we all gather at this resort in Colorado for her 60th birthday. Everyone agreed to come, even my sister who'd moved to Australia 5 years ago. I'd been quiet about my attendance, non-committal in the group chat, but I confirmed 2 weeks ago that I'd be there. What they didn't know was that I owned the place. 6 years ago, I'd been the family disappointment, the one who dropped out of business school to pursue what my father called a fantasy. I wanted to work in hospitality, to build something from the ground up. My older brother had become a surgeon. My sister married a lawyer. I was the one serving tables at a resort in Aspen, learning the industry from the bottom. My family never let me forget it. Every holiday dinner became a performance where they'd ask about my career with barely concealed pity. My father would talk about real jobs and stability. My mother would sigh and mention how she'd hoped all her children would be successful. My brother's wife would smile that tight smile and change the subject whenever I spoke. So I stopped going to the dinners. I stopped answering the group chat. I focused on work. The general manager of the Aspen Resort saw something in me. He mentored me, taught me everything about operations, guest relations, property management. When he retired, he helped me secure a loan and sold me a small struggling in 2 hours outside Denver. I was 27 and terrified. I worked 16-hour days. I renovated every room myself. I learned accounting, marketing, staffing. The inn started turning a profit within a year. I bought another property, then another. I formed an LLC, hired a team, and expanded. By 30, I owned 4 boutique hotels across Colorado. By 32, I just closed on this resort, the largest property in my portfolio. The same resort where my family had booked their reunion. I'd seen the reservation come through 3 months ago. My mother's name on a block of 12 rooms for a week-long stay. My assistant asked if I wanted to handle it personally. I told her no, let it process normally, but flag me when they checked in. I'd arrived a day early under a fake reservation, watching from the security office as my family pulled up in their rental cars. My brother stepped out first, his wife beside him, their 2 kids running toward the entrance. My sister emerged next with her husband, looking jet-lagged but happy. My parents came last, my father's hair grayer than I remembered, my mother moving slower. Something twisted in my chest seeing them. Part of me wanted to run down and surprise them, to show them what I'd built, to prove I'd made something of myself. But I remembered my brother's words from the last dinner I'd attended, how he'd told me I was wasting my life, how I'd never amount to anything in the service industry. I remembered my father nodding in agreement. So I waited. The rooms were distributed at check-in. My assistant manager, who knew the situation, had followed my instructions precisely. Everyone got upgraded accommodations except for 1 room. The reservation under my name, the one I'd kept hidden, got assigned to a converted storage space in the basement level that we technically listed as available but never actually gave to guests. I changed clothes and approached the front desk an hour after they'd all settled in. My mother was there, had come down to ask about dinner reservations. She looked at me for a long moment, and I watched the recognition dawn slowly, followed immediately by something that looked like embarrassment. She asked what I was doing here, her voice uncertain. I told her I was here for the reunion, that I'd gotten the invitation months ago. Her face shifted then, hardening in a way I recognized from childhood whenever I'd disappointed her. She called the others down. They gathered in the lobby like a tribunal. My brother arrived first, his expression moving from surprise to something colder. My sister came next, looking uncomfortable. My father was last, and his face told me everything I needed to know about how this would go. My brother asked if I could even afford to be here. The question hung in the air, sharp and cutting. I told him I'd managed. My sister-in-law laughed, that same brittle sound I remembered from family dinners. She said something about how I must have saved up from my serving job. My father interrupted, his voice tired, saying we should just get me checked in and sorted. He approached the front desk and asked if there were any rooms left. The desk clerk, following the script we'd prepared, said they were completely booked except for one remaining space. My brother's wife made a comment about how convenient it was that there was exactly one room left. The clerk apologized and explained it was our last available accommodation. My mother asked to see it first before committing. We all went down together. The moment the door opened to that basement storage room, the temperature in the hallway dropped. My sister made a small sound of dismay. My brother's face twisted with barely concealed disgust. My father just shook his head. My brother turned to me and said this was probably what I was used to anyway. His wife added that I get what I deserved. They both laughed. My sister looked away. My parents said nothing. I stood there, feeling 12 years old again, feeling small and inadequate and wrong. The old instinct to defend myself rose up, but I pushed it down. Instead, I smiled and said it would be fine, that I'd make do. I thanked them for including me in the reunion. The pity on my mother's face was worse than the contempt on my brother's. They left me there, and I heard their voices fade as they returned to the elevator, already making jokes about my accommodations. I sat on the cot and stared at the wall, that old familiar shame washing over me before I remembered where I was. Before I remembered who I'd become. I pulled out my phone and called my assistant manager. I told her to proceed with phase 2. The next morning, I joined them for breakfast in the main dining room. They'd taken over a long table by the windows overlooking the mountain range. I approached and asked if I could sit with them. My brother gestured to an empty chair at the far end, separated from the main group. Breakfast was exactly as I'd expected. They talked among themselves about their lives, their accomplishments, their plans. My brother described a complex surgery he'd performed. My sister talked about her husband's latest case. My parents beamed with pride. Nobody asked me anything. When the check came, my father made a show of saying it was on him, that he'd cover everyone. Then he looked at me and said I should probably pay my own way, given my circumstances. My brother agreed, adding that it wouldn't be fair to make Dad cover someone who couldn't contribute to the family. I placed cash on the table for my meal and excused myself. That afternoon, they'd planned activities. Spa treatments for the women, golf for the men. I wasn't invited to either. Instead, I went to my office on the administrative floor and worked, watching the security feeds occasionally, seeing my family enjoy the amenities I'd built. Dinner that evening was when things started to shift. They'd made reservations at our premium restaurant, the one that typically required bookings weeks in advance. I'd made sure they got a table. I'd also made sure I had the table directly next to theirs, close enough to hear everything but positioned so they'd have to turn to see me. I wore one of my better suits, the kind I wore for investor meetings. I'd showered and groomed carefully. When I walked into the restaurant, I looked different than I had at breakfast. I looked successful. My sister noticed first. She did a double take when I passed their table. I nodded politely and continued to my seat. I heard her whisper something to her husband. My brother turned to look, his expression puzzled. Throughout dinner, I could feel their attention shifting toward me. The server treated me with particular deference, the kind reserved for VIPs. The sommelier brought over a bottle of wine I hadn't ordered, compliments of the house. The chef came out personally to ensure my meal was satisfactory. My brother finally stood and approached my table. He asked what was going on, why I was getting special treatment. I told him I'd stayed here before, that they remembered me. He looked skeptical but returned to his table. After dinner, my mother approached. She asked directly if something was different, if there was something I hadn't told them. I smiled and said I'd tell them everything soon, that they should enjoy their vacation. The worry on her face was evident. Day 3 was the peak of the reunion. My mother's actual birthday celebration, a catered event in our largest conference room. I'd approved the booking personally, had even upgraded some of their requests without charge. I arrived early and watched as they filtered in, all dressed up, all happy and laughing. My brother saw me standing near the entrance and walked over. He said I didn't have to stay if I couldn't afford to chip in for the party costs. He mentioned they'd split it among everyone who could contribute. His meaning was clear. I told him I'd already paid for my share. The party progressed. Speeches were made. My father toasted my mother, talking about their life together, their successful children, their beautiful family. He listed accomplishments, mentioned my brother's career, my sister's family. He skipped over me entirely. When it came time for gifts, my brother presented a luxury cruise. My sister gave expensive jewelry. I handed my mother an envelope. She opened it with visible reluctance, probably expecting a gift card or something modest. Inside was a deed. She stared at it, confused, then looked up at me with questions in her eyes. I told her it was the deed to a property. A small cabin about 20 miles from here, in the mountains, fully furnished. Something she'd mentioned wanting years ago, a quiet place to retreat. My father took the deed from her hands and examined it. His expression changed as he read. He asked how I could afford this. My brother demanded to see it. The room had gone quiet. My brother studied the deed, then looked at the letterhead. He went pale. He asked if this was real. I confirmed it was. My sister asked what was happening. My brother showed her the deed. She read it, and her face transformed from confusion to shock. The property was valued at just over $500,000. My father's voice was hard when he asked where I'd gotten this kind of money. The implication was clear. He thought I'd done something illegal, something shameful. I'd planned this moment for weeks. I'd rehearsed different versions. But standing there, seeing the suspicion and judgment on their faces, the old hurt rose up sharp and fresh. I pulled out my phone and made a call. I told my assistant manager to come to the conference room. She arrived within 2 minutes, tablet in hand. I introduced her to my family. I explained that she was the assistant manager of this resort. Then I explained that I was the owner. The silence that followed was absolute. My brother said I was lying. My father demanded proof. I turned to my assistant manager and asked her to pull up the ownership documents. She handed the tablet to my father. He read through everything. The LLC formation papers. The property acquisition documents. My name on every page. He looked up at me, and for the first time in my adult life, I couldn't read his expression. My mother asked why I hadn't told them. I said I hadn't been sure they'd care. My sister protested, saying of course they'd have cared. I looked at her and reminded her of the last 3 years of silence, of the calls I'd made that went unreturned, of the group chat messages I'd sent that were ignored. My brother's wife said something about how I should have tried harder to stay in touch. I laughed at that, the sound bitter. I asked if she remembered telling me I was wasting my life. I asked if she remembered suggesting I wasn't really part of the family because I didn't have a real career. She denied saying that. My brother backed her up. But my sister's face told me she remembered. I told them the truth then. I explained how I'd built this from nothing. How I'd worked jobs they'd have been ashamed to acknowledge. How I'd scraped together loans and worked 100-hour weeks and sacrificed everything to prove I could succeed on my own terms. I told them about the storage room they'd put me in. How it had felt to be relegated to the worst space while they enjoyed premium suites. How they'd laughed and said I'd get what I deserved. My mother started to cry. She said she hadn't known, hadn't realized. My father's face had gone red. My brother tried to defend their actions. He said they'd thought I was struggling, that they were trying to be realistic about my situation. I asked if humiliating me was their version of help. The silence stretched. Several family members tried to speak, to explain, to justify. I let them talk until they ran out of words. Then I told them their reservations were canceled. All of them. My father protested. He said they'd paid, that they had rights as guests. I explained that as owner, I had the right to refuse service. I'd already processed their refunds. They had until morning to vacate. My mother begged me to reconsider. She said this was her birthday celebration, that we were family. I told her family doesn't treat each other the way they'd treated me. My brother got angry then. He raised his voice, caused a scene. I called security. 2 of my best staff members arrived within minutes. I instructed them to escort my family to their rooms and ensure they packed. Watching security lead them away, seeing the shock and anger and hurt on their faces, I felt something complicated. Victory mixed with sadness, mixed with a vindication that tasted like ash. My sister broke away from her husband and approached me. She apologized, tears streaming down her face. She said she'd been wrong, that she'd been a coward for not defending me. She asked if there was any way to fix this. I told her I didn't know. They left the next morning. I watched from my office as they loaded their cars, their vacation cut short, their reunion destroyed. My mother looked up at the building before getting in the car, and I wondered if she could see me behind the tinted windows. My phone started ringing an hour after they left. Messages poured in. Apologies, anger, confusion, accusations. I turned it off. Update 1. It's been 3 weeks since the reunion. I've had time to process what happened, to think about whether I made the right choice. The answer isn't simple. My sister reached out after a week. She sent a long email. No excuses, just acknowledgement of how badly they'd treated me. She said she'd spent years convincing herself that their behavior was normal family dynamics, that the teasing and dismissiveness was just how siblings acted. She recognized now that it was cruelty. We met for coffee at a neutral location. She cried through most of it. She told me about her own struggles with the family, how she'd felt pressured to marry the right person, have the right career, maintain the right image. How she'd failed me because she was too afraid of becoming the family disappointment herself. I listened. I didn't forgive her immediately, but I didn't shut the door completely either. My brother never apologized. Instead, he sent a legal letter suggesting I defrauded them by not disclosing my ownership before they booked. My lawyer sent back a response explaining exactly how legally baseless his claim was. That was the end of that communication. My parents were more complicated. My father called 2 weeks after the incident. He didn't apologize either, not directly. Instead, he talked about expectations and disappointment, about how hard it had been to watch me struggle. He said he'd been trying to protect me by being realistic about my chances. I told him protection shouldn't feel like rejection. He didn't have an answer for that. My mother sent a card. Inside was a photo from my childhood, me at maybe 7 or 8, grinning at the camera with missing front teeth. On the back, she'd written that she missed that little boy, that she was sorry she'd lost sight of who he'd become. It wasn't enough, but it was something. The business continued. The resort had its best quarter yet. I hired more staff, improved amenities, started planning an expansion. I threw myself into work the way I always had when emotions got complicated. But something had shifted. The victory I'd imagined, the moment I'd proved them all wrong, had happened. And I felt empty. My therapist, who I'd started seeing after the incident, asked me what I'd really wanted from that confrontation. I'd thought I wanted validation, proof of my worth, revenge for years of dismissal. What I actually wanted was for them to have been proud of me all along, for the success to have been celebrated rather than doubted, for my family to have been my family. You can't revenge your way into that. Update 2. 2 months out now. Things have continued to evolve in ways I didn't expect. My mother showed up at the resort unannounced 4 weeks ago. Just her, no one else. She booked a room under her maiden name and asked the front desk to let me know she was here. I almost didn't meet with her. I sat in my office for an hour, staring at the message, trying to decide if I had anything left to say. Finally, I went down. We sat in the lobby bar, the afternoon lights streaming through the windows, the resort quiet between checkout and check-in times. She looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. She told me she'd been thinking about the reunion every day since it happened, about the storage room, about my face when they'd laughed. She said she'd convinced herself over the years that her honest assessment of my choices was parenting, was caring, that by tempering my expectations, she was protecting me from disappointment. I asked her if she'd ever considered that she was the disappointment. She absorbed that, nodded slowly. Then she told me something I hadn't known. When I'd first started working at the Aspen Resort, she'd driven up to see me. She hadn't come inside, hadn't let me know she was there. She'd sat in the parking lot and watched me through the window, serving tables, smiling at guests, working. She said she'd cried in her car because I looked happy, because she'd expected to see me miserable and struggling, and instead she'd seen someone who loved what they did. And it had terrified her because it meant she'd been wrong. She'd gone home and never mentioned the visit. Had continued to treat my career choice as a failure because admitting otherwise would mean confronting her own prejudices, her own narrow definition of success. I didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to yell at her, to demand to know why she'd let years pass without saying anything. Another part understood. Fear makes people do terrible things, even to the people they love. I asked her what she wanted now. She said she didn't want anything except the chance to know me. The real me, not the version she'd created in her head. I told her I'd think about it. She stayed 3 days. We had breakfast together each morning. We talked about small things, carefully avoiding the big topics. On the 3rd day, she asked if she could see what I'd built. Not just the resort, but the other properties. We spent the day driving around Colorado. I showed her the first inn I'd bought, now fully renovated and consistently booked. The boutique hotel in Boulder. The ski lodge in Vail. The bed and breakfast in Steamboat Springs. At each stop, she asked questions. How had I financed it? What was my occupancy rate? What challenges had I faced? She listened like she was trying to memorize every detail. At the end of the day, we sat in the parking lot of the resort, the sun setting behind the mountains. She told me she was proud of me, that she knew it didn't fix anything, but she needed me to hear it. I believed her. She left the next morning. Things aren't fixed between us. I'm not sure they ever will be completely. But there's a crack in the wall now, a place where light might get through. My sister and I have been texting regularly. Short messages, mostly. She sent me photos of her kids, asked about the business. It feels like we're learning how to be siblings again, or maybe for the first time. My brother and father remain silent. I've accepted that some relationships might not be salvageable. That revenge, even justified revenge, has costs that aren't always worth paying. The resort thrives. I'm opening a 6th property next spring, a historic hotel in downtown Denver that I'm restoring. My team is incredible. My work fulfills me. But I think about that reunion sometimes. About the look on their faces when security escorted them out. About the satisfaction I felt in that moment and how quickly it faded. I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret showing them what I'd become. But I wonder sometimes if there was a better way, a path that didn't require burning everything down to prove a point. My therapist says that's growth. That being able to hold both truths, that I was justified and that the cost was high, means I'm processing this in a healthy way. I'm trying to believe her. The family group chat still exists. I'm still in it. Messages appear sometimes, though less frequently. My brother discussing his cases. My sister sharing photos. My parents sending holiday greetings. I don't respond often, but I don't leave either. It's enough, for now, to know I built something that matters. To know I don't need their validation anymore, even if part of me still wants it. To know that the worst room in the hotel couldn't contain who I'd become. They gave me what they thought I deserved. I showed them what I'd earned. The revenge was sweet. The aftermath is complicated. The future is uncertain. But the hotel is mine. The business is thriving. And I'm learning that success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. I sleep in the presidential suite now when I stay at the resort. The view from the top floor is extraordinary. Sometimes I stand at the window and look down at where that storage room is, several floors below. I think about the person who slept there 2 months ago, hurt and angry and determined to prove something. I understand him. I'm grateful to him, but I don't want to be him anymore. Revenge got me here, but it won't get me where I need to go next. That's something else entirely.